Hi, everybody. This is Kathy L. Murphy, the Pulpwood Queen, reporting live from my little cabin in the woods, Murphy's Law. And we are here this morning with our special guest, our official Pulpwood Queen and Timber Guy author, Steven Manchester, who first came on board with us with this wonderful book, The Menu. And I just am just amazed by how fast he gets books out, because I just received in the mail the latest one that just released this week, Lawn, Darts, and Lemonade. This is fantastic. And you have some really big news about your Thursday night book club
Right.
So first I want you I'm going to put you on speaker view. I'm just going to have you tell everybody about your background, your family,
Sure.
how this all got, the writing story got started, and then we'll discuss your writing workshop. Okay, here we
Perfect. That
Okay.
sounds good.
Go ahead, Steve.
All right. So thank you very much, Kathy. I appreciate it as always. You really are the best. And, anybody who's in this industry is grateful to you. It means so much, right, to provide the support that you do. So it's not lost on me. It's a blessing to be here today. So thank you for that. So I'm Steve Manchester. I've been writing for about 30 years. And probably the best way for me to explain my path and my journey is my grandfather was an amazing storyteller, right? And he was an old swamp Yankee from Massachusetts, right? So, you could sit at the foot of his rocking chair and he'd spin a tale, right? And you couldn't tell if it was fact, fiction, what was true, what wasn't true. And it didn't even matter. All he taught me at that point, and I was young, was that, words have power. They can connect us as human beings. They can bring you to sorrow, but they can also bring joy. And the thing that I love most about it is it was something that we shared. It was something, every story that was told, every part of that family legacy that was passed down was something that I shared with my siblings, and then I went and shared with my children, so that it creates a strength within those bonds, right? And I see writing in the same way. So fast forward 20 years, I actually pursue a career in law enforcement. So I worked for the Department of Corrections in Massachusetts. I was an investigator, which is to say more or less like a detective inside of a prison. So incredibly negative, somewhat dangerous. But as a young man, I was addicted to the adrenaline. And at that point in my life, it was, I was kind of making my bones and coming up with things to write about. I didn't realize at the time. So I'm in the National Guard, U.S. Army. I was a sergeant, squad leader for a military police unit. And we got activated. If you guys remember Operation Desert Shield, we got activated and then actually trained for desert warfare. And we went over to Operation Desert Storm. And after 41 days of uninterrupted bombing, we were part of the ground forces that went in. Without getting into the morbid detail of it, I was 23 years old. So at the time, that's considered kind of an old person, right? Like I'm a squad leader. I got, 14 people under me, and we're kind of, going from Saudi Arabia into Iraq and supporting some of the infantry and army units that are going up in there. And our job was to collect POWs, right? Prisoners of war. Saddam Hussein's fort would take the Americans 6 months to get through the breach. So basically this, berm of sand about 60 feet tall off the desert floor with all kinds of, booby traps and landmines and everything on the other side. So rather than 6 months, it actually took the Allied forces around 17 minutes to get through. And when we pounded through, there was supposed to be divisions of Republican Guard that were waiting for us, and they were actually hightailing it. And to be honest with you, given what I witnessed with the technology and the differences between it, I'm not sure I blamed them all that much, right? They were really outgunned. Anyway, this is where, and the only reason I even tell you those details is because it plays into, me thinking about my grandfather in the desert. His nickname was Swamp Yankee. So my call sign in the desert was Swamp Yankee to honor my grandfather. And my last name means the world to me. It was passed down from my grandfather to my father to me. When I talk to my children, I tell them all the time, when you leave this house, you represent our name, right? And I don't care what you do. And it doesn't matter to me how much money you make or how successful, however you want to measure that, but you better be kind and you better be a decent person, because that's, you got people that are watching you from the past, right? So I get into, this ground war. We're maybe 2 months into it, and my platoon sergeant asked me to take him to an evac hospital. He was having problems. He was actually a Vietnam veteran. So we jump in a Humvee together. We're going to travel about 60 miles from Iraq into Saudi Arabia. And this is during the day. So to make a very long story short, I'm driving, he's in the passenger seat. We hit a sandstorm, or what we call a dust storm. So it's like taking a can of powdered, Kool-Aid, right, and throwing it in your face. I mean, there's zero visibility. The problem with that is I need to get out of Iraq, because just like us, I mean, the Iraqis were coming out at night, they were hunting for Americans. So it's just he and I, we have two weapons, but nothing where we could hold folks off for too long. I end up hitting a boulder with the right front tire, and I spin this Humvee, and I basically spun it end over end, right? So crushed the windshield, I crushed the driver's side. I got thrown from the vehicle, which is telling me, that there was somebody looking out for me, because had I been strapped in, I wouldn't be here today, right? I would have been gone, right? So I end up waking up. The Humvee's up on its roof, crushed. My platoon sergeant's hanging upside down. So I treat him for shock. Again, I was a squad leader and I worked in a prison. So not to say that I couldn't be shaken a little bit, but I was used to conflict and confrontation. I was very well trained and incredibly confident, right, in my skills. But we were stuck in the middle of the desert for about 3 hours. The antenna's buried under the vehicle. I can't call for a medevac, and he's not doing too well. He's in and out of consciousness. So besides saying a few prayers, which I had said daily anyway, I remember making a promise to myself, not if, but when I get home, I'm going to chase my dream down. I'm going to become a writer. And I realized, the rejection rate from soup to nuts hovers around 97%. But if I only get one shot at this, I would rather fail at something that I'm passionate about than succeed at something that I hate. And I came home, and it took me about, 3 to 5 years to really, get my feet under me as far as the writing. I had to find a way to sustain myself and be responsible to my family. As everybody knows who writes, it's certainly not an easy journey, and it's definitely not easy when you first get started. So I stuck with it, and I really put in the seat time to get to where I am today. So 30 years later, I want to thank my grandfather and just the experiences that I've had to bring me here. And it's not lost on me that the most tragic moment in my life was also the turning point. And now when I tell my kids, like, you can have whatever you want, but you can't wish for it. You got to work for it, right? It's them actually watching it. It's not, kids don't listen, right? They watch. So I'm very grateful for that. And I think my writing career, I think for most people, nothing's ever handed to them. You really do need to work for it. In my case, I had no contacts. I had, people ask me all the time where I learned how to write, and I'll tell them Southeastern. I was recently at a conference, which was kind of comical. Where did you learn how to write? I learned at Southeastern in Massachusetts. Oh, is that a college? I said, no, it's actually a medium security prison about 60 miles south of Boston, right? And I went to college, and I've taken writing courses, and I've learned from some people who are much, much more talented than I am, right? But it's all about the practice. So for about 5 years, I really started with police report writing, and then realized, and this is kind of the rub, and you'll see it as I get into today's presentation, but I actually write tearjerkers, and I'm known for writing male perspective to a female audience, which is also somewhat comical to me in some, but it's what I'm comfortable doing, right? So I can write about the prison system I have. I can write about, the graphic craziness of being in a war, and I've done that as well. But I am much, much more comfortable, or I should say, the time is better spent for me to write emotional works, right, that kind of connect us. And I think that's a wink to my grandfather. I really do. Like, it's something that's built in me. It's in my DNA, right? So I think when you first get started, you're trying to figure out your voice, and I didn't even know, and I hate the word plagiarism, but I'm not even sure I could plagiarize now, because I'm so, mired in the way that I tell a story and my tone and my voice. Even if I were to tell something different that doesn't take place in New England, my readers would be able to tell that, Steve's the one who wrote this book, right? A little bit of sarcastic wit, a little bit of this and that, all about developing the characters, and we'll get into that. But I'm super grateful. So I've written about 17 full-length works. 7 of them are national bestsellers. 4 of them have gone to #1, which is fantastic. And all that means to me really is it gives me an opportunity to write more and to continue to, to speak on the platform that I've poured. When I talk to newer writers, and I'll talk a little bit about it today, it's really about, you have to write for yourself and for the people that you love, because it's going to take forever to have any success at all, right? Unless you happen to step in it. And if you do, good for you, right? We'll go have a coffee and we'll celebrate that. But For the most part, it's a lot of work, and it's something that you need to be okay with. Like when I first got started, I wasn't sure things are going to be published, and to me, it's like, it's like faith, right? So I'm walking a path of faith, and well, what about the money? Well, it's that's deferred. At some point, by default, I'm going to end up making money, but whether anybody reads this or not, I am going to write it, and I am very passionate about it, whatever the project is. So I continue to kind of knock that home. Today, what some of my successes afforded me is I'm able to speak, like in front of you folks today. I do a lot of work with younger kids from Department of Youth Services, kids in lockup who are on their way to prison. We've done fundraisers for children, and I love working with new writers. And I'm not talking about age. I'm talking about people that just get started, because as much as I could teach somebody, it's probably more effective for me to become the cheerleader, right? And say, hey, listen, you can do this, right? You can do this, right? You can picture it, right? And then it becomes like, if you can see that, then you can kind of back into it, right? But you need to have at least some of that in order to sustain you during those long nights, right? Where you're all by yourself and it's this neurotic world that you're trying to create. So I'm blessed. What Kathy brought up earlier is about 4 or 5 years ago, my wife and I rented a house on Martha's Vineyard, and fortunately, we have a friend who owns the home, so we're able to get a good deal on it. We bring the family over, and it's just awesome. Like when you go to Martha's Vineyard, the cell service is absolutely terrible. So you return back to 1964, right? A bicycle built for two. They have gazebos. It's awesome. And we've got the house from Saturday to Saturday, but we can only get the car over on the ferry on Friday. So that means somebody needs to be homeless for the night, right? So I put my hand up, I volunteer, and I drive in the morning on a Friday, and I circle this park called Ocean Park in Oak Bluffs. And I finally find a parking spot that's only good for 4 hours. And I start writing, and I start writing a story called The Thursday Night Club. Now, this is like mid-July, kids are flying kites, right? It's hot. And I don't know why I'm writing this story, but I'm writing this Christmas story. And I spent about 14 hours in the park. So every 4 hours, I get in the car, I circle again, I come back, I find another parking spot. And that was the end of it. The family comes over, we have a great week. I don't think too much of it. The book gets published maybe a year and a half later. And 2 years ago, I'm sorry, 2.5 years ago, I get a call from my publisher saying, hey, they want to do an audio podcast drama starring Kathleen Turner. And we're going to record this in Brooklyn. And this, I'm like, wow, that's going to be fantastic. So they do. It is beyond a thrill. And I continue to hype the project because it's free, right? So whenever I tell people, hey, I got this podcast drama, there's 6 episodes, it's also really nice to say, I'm not trying to get $1 out of your wallet, right? I'm just telling you that you can download them for free from Apple or wherever. And I'm beyond excited for this because it's something that comes out every year. I got a call about 6 months ago saying, hey, listen, we're going to take it to the next level. We're going to make a film out of it. So now I'm like, oh my God, like this. So this becomes a dream come true. So as we negotiate the contract, obviously everybody needs to get paid, right? And for whatever reason, the writer gets paid last. And I'm sure you've heard a lot of those stories, but I have good representation, and the guy that I'm working with is more than fair. So I said, listen, there's only a few things I want. And one of them is, my daughter is a musical theater person in high school, and she's on her way to college for musical theater, right? So as much as it's nice to get the check, and my wife and I will spend that money, right? I also want my kid in the movie. Say, well, we'll see what we can do best of it. No, I want my kid in the movie, right? This is my passion. 30 years of sharing my passion with something that she's passionate about, and she's just getting started, right? Doesn't have to. I'm not, I mean, obviously it's nepotism, and it doesn't have to be crazy where she's a starring role, but I need her in this movie so that I can, sit with her kids and say, I wrote it and your mom was in it, right? And that's the legacy stuff that means everything to me. And that's the reason I continue to write. So recently on an interview, somebody had asked me, what's the greatest thing I've ever given my 4 children? And the answer is they watched me fail for more than 20 years. And I never quit. And I still had a full-time job during the day. And, I'm not so neurotic that I write on Christmases or anybody's birthday, right? But I don't like reality TV, right? You can keep the Kardashians. So for me, it's all about spending that time in front of the laptop and developing these stories. Fortunately, I've been blessed with plenty of ideas. So I don't know if it's a cursing or a blessing, but I basically put out a book a year. And I am driven to put out a book a year. And here's the cool part. I don't compete against any other writers. I see writers that are breaking in, that are doing fantastic. I see some of the people Kathy's working with and get them. And I honestly, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, I could not be happier for these folks. Right. And I know other writers that are like, oh, you know, like if Steve's doing, and I'm not trying to, you know, but for me, I just need to make sure my next book is better than the last one I wrote, right? Because it's about the body of work and something I can share. Because in the end, we're only temporary caretakers, right, for all of this. And, you know, when it's all said and done, it'd be really cool to have one of my grandkids or great grandkids read one of these books and laugh, right, about the backstory, which is why I share what I do. You know, so that's pretty much me in a nutshell. I'm as excited today about writing as I have been when I first started. Things come a little bit easier for me now. It used to take me 9-12 months to write a book. It probably takes me closer to 4 to 6 months now. The book that I just sent Kathy is a sequel that was released on Tuesday called Lawn Darts and Lemonade. And my dad passed 3 years ago. So the original book, and it's the only sequel I've ever written. Thank you, Kathy. So the first book is called Bread Bags and Bullies, and it's about these 3 boys that get trapped in a, you know, during a nor'easter in the house. And the 3 maniacs drive their parents crazy, right? And this was a love letter to my dad, but really a thank you letter to my dad, and a love letter to the 80s. We got a ton of really cool endorsements. And then I decided, you know what, I think the story needs a bit more real estate. So we're going to push it from the winter of 1984 into the summer of 1984. And we're going to bring everybody back to the 1980s, right? So from the Rubik's Cube to riding the roller coaster, going to the mall and the arcades. And it was awesome because the research was just me tapping into some old memories and, you know, so a lot of fun. So those are the projects we got going now. I just flew back from Alabama. I'm working with a gentleman down there for a historical biographical novel, actually on St. Peter. So this is going to be a really different deal. So it's basically the 3.5 years of Jesus's ministry, but through the eyes of his first apostle.
Wow.
Yeah. So the intensity, and I'm telling you, the reason I took this on is because it terrified me. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, I'm going to have to go back to that research place, right? And I ended up immersing myself in the research for 2 full months. So 8 weeks before I even got on a plane and went down and was able to sit at a table and talk to this gentleman. And we talked about, it took us 2.5 days. And I mean, sequestered for 2.5 days, you know, 14, 16-hour days to just get the timeline. And then we started to storyboard it, which kind of, you know, it segues into what I'm going to talk about today. And then just to get to a place where, yeah, we agree on this. Yeah, this is the point of view. This is the story break. This is the point of view. This is, you know, everything from, you know, we're going to write in the past tense. It's going to be the, not the omniscient narrator, but limited. So we can only be in one viewpoint at a time. We break the story. We go into the next viewpoint. If we want to, we come back. So this is me teaching him how to storyboard so that I can understand what's in his head. And I told him, you know, after 6 days, when I got back on the plane, I will be absolutely horrified if I do not know the essence of this story. And he said, well, what do you mean by essence? I said, I can write it. I've been writing for 30 years. I just need to know who this guy is or who you think this guy is and how we're going to attack it, right? So that, you know, the common man, the fisherman, you know, all of a sudden this man shows up in sandals who's a carpenter and he's speaking in parables and he doesn't really understand what's going on. So how do you relate that to today, you know, for people that are living 2,000 years from then, right? I'm not the most religious person, but I am a man of faith and I feel blessed to be able to have this opportunity. But some of the negotiations is, listen, the last thing I'm ever going to do is rewrite the gospel, right? Because, you know, when I finally close my eyes, I do not want to get batted in the back of the head by the guy at the gate, right? So I'm excited. So I got probably a calendar year to get that done, and then I have another book that I've started storyboarding. And so for me, the excitement is always what's to come. People ask me what's the best book I've ever written. It's always the one I'm working on because I love the process. I love the creative process. And it's nice, you know, in the beginning, you used to, you know, I'd get a book that was published, put it up on the mantle like it was a trophy. Then I realized how ridiculous I am. I shouldn't have, you know, books up on a mantle. There should be framed photos of my children, right? Which they were there as well. But, and then it's almost like, okay, so I think one of the greatest things of having some success in writing is not caring what other people think, right? So when you first get started, it's like, well, I need approval from you know, external approval. You need it, right, in order to get published. So I've had enough success where now it's like, I'm going to write what I want when I want, and if people like it, I'm really, really happy about that. If they don't, I'm writing it for my kids and grandkids anyway. And as long as I stay true to that, I'm probably going to be in pretty good shape. So I think that's, and I can go on forever, but I think that's enough for now to give you some of my background and why I do what I do. And again, for me, being able to share some of the stuff that I've learned along the way is also a blessing because, you know, karma plays a big, big part in this. And any chance I can to help another writer, I will. Don't get me wrong. I've had people ask me, hey, can you do this and do that? And then I'll look at it and I say, well, that'll take me like 6 months. So if you can paint my house and then chop some cordwood for me, and then, you know what I mean? Then we'll talk about it, right? But well, whether it's editing or trying to help somebody find an agent or a publisher, or even talking about the process of writing, because it never grows old for me. Even having 30 years experience, I love talking about process. And you know, Kathy and I could talk for 3 minutes and I could learn something that's going to shave time off, right? Or make me enjoy the process even more and probably stress out less. So anytime I get a chance to talk to a writer, looking at it from a different viewpoint, I'm in. I'm definitely in. So again, Kathy, thank you for letting me be here today.
Well, the reason why we started the Writers Club, because we're a community of readers and our authors are such a big part of the conversation because I bring in the authors into every conversation. And the one thing I've noticed when we feature our authors each week on our blog and on our Tuesday night book club is the process that they go through in writing. So Mandy and I came up with the idea of starting the Writers Club because why don't our authors mentor to other authors? I mean, quite frankly, the only person you compete against is yourself. I mean,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm a firm believer in that. And the more that we give, the more that comes back to us. So thank you for your generosity of doing this. And now we want to hear about this writing process. So tell us all about it.
And so thank you again also for recording this, right? So, you know, it's never a convenient time for folks. The idea that this is being recorded and that we can share it out is tremendous, right? So thank you for that as well. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to throw up a PowerPoint. I'm not in love with PowerPoint presentations, but
it helps. It helps.
Yeah. Like this. Can you see it? Are we good?
No, I can't see it yet. Let me see.
Let me do this.
There we go.
All right, good. So let me let me go to the first slide from the beginning. So just bear with me for a second here, and then we're going to get right into it. All right, here we go. So figuring out your strengths as a writer. So for me, whenever I kind of deliver this, it's as much a reminder to me as anybody else. And again, I don't care if you have 40 years in the business or you've got 4 months. It's always important to go back to basics. I remember going to a book signing 5 years ago. I was in Cape Cod. We had a little bit of a line, which is, you know, not a bad thing. And this woman walked in, and I could tell that she was visually impaired, right? That she was having problems with her eyesight, and she's hanging on the arm of a younger woman. So I said to my wife, "Hey, just give me a minute. I want to go." And the person who was waiting to get their book signed, I went over and gave her a hug, and I said, "I want to thank you for teaching me how to write." And her name is Mrs. Parsons. She was my 4th grade teacher.
Oh.
Right. And she kind of like laughed it off. And I said, "No, you have no idea. Like, I always go back to basics, right? The 5 senses, the this and that, you know, that's what people want. I mean, it's easy to overwrite, and it's easy to use a thesaurus and talk over people's head and try to prove that you're wicked smart, right? From Boston. But you don't need to do that. For me, when it's all said and done, I hope that I'm remembered more as a storyteller than a writer, right? I just happen to use this format, but it's all about the story. All right, so the real questions, and this is for me too. Every time I sit down and write a book, and some of these slides are a little bit busy, but I'm going to ask Kathy to share them out. And anytime I teach, it's always like, you know, do I put 4 bullets down, or do I actually give you this so you can listen and you don't have to write down the notes, right? You're going to have the notes right here, and I'm going to share them out as well.
Yeah.
So it's all about inspiration. And then this is a 2-edged sword, right? This is a double-edged sword. So for me, I know I'm writing for my kids, I'm writing for my wife, my family. I also know that if it's not going to be an emotional work, something that's going to move people, because there's a saying, right? Like, you know, good writers will make somebody think, but a great writer will make somebody feel. If I walk out of a theater and, you know, Kathy and I are watching a movie, we both walk out sobbing, right? And somebody stops us and says, "What was the movie about?" I could tell them in 2 or 3 sentences. Well, can you repeat or regurgitate 4 or 5 lines? I may not be able to do that. So I'm less worried about trying to, you know, get in these fantastic lines that people are going to quote versus giving you an experience, right? And people only read to learn about something. And if they're reading fiction, it's to escape. So my job is to make sure that you escape and come to my world, and let me put you there in the setting, and the characters have to be, developed correctly and whatnot. So for me, it's about evoking emotion and passion, right? What do I really want to write about? And I talk about this in my head before I actually start a book. Because if I say to people, listen, I'm going to start a book, I know that I'm committed for the next 9 months of my life. This is going to take up 9 months of my life, right? So I've been writing for 30 years. I was fortunate to start when I was fairly young. I don't know how many years I have left. I'm hoping quite a few, right? Because I want to continue to put out works. But each book becomes more precious because, listen, I may have 7 ideas, but I really want to hone in on that right idea that I can be passionate about and develop, right? And if I were only writing for myself, what would I write? The worst thing that younger writers, and again, I'm never talking about age, right? So I'll say newer writers. One of the worst things that they do is they try to write for an audience, right, that they're not a part of. So if you're truly writing for yourself, like if you don't like fantasy, if you don't like reading fantasy, if you're not obsessed with fantasy, do not write fantasy, right? Like write something that you love, because it's going to bleed through. And if I'm telling you, if I can't laugh when I'm writing something, I will never expect my reader to laugh. And if I can't cry, I don't expect my readers to cry, right? One of the blessings that I have is that I'm very, very comfortable in my own skin. Right, I have a background that, when I sit in a room, I'm 6 feet tall, I weigh 240, and I write these tearjerkers. And there's people that have never met me that kind of laugh because it's, here's the guy that makes me cry in books, and I have a different persona. But one of the blessings, right, that I've had, right? So once you have the answer to what would I really write about and what would I write for myself, and I think the second one's probably even more important, right? How comfortable or skilled am I in this sort of writing? And sometimes it takes a very long time to get going. I'll tell people, and I'm not trying to discourage anybody, right, in this recording, but for me, 10 to 15 years before I really, really had my feet solidly under me. That's not saying that the first 10 years were not phenomenal, and then I wasn't able to learn things and go along as I go, right? But for me, when I say comfortable and skilled, that means something different for me today than it did, 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? So for anybody, you really do need to ask yourself that. Like, would I be comfortable, writing about something in the first person, right? Because I can kind of, or can I use the third person and, use God looking through a window who understands everybody's thoughts, feelings, actions, reactions. If I write in the first person, I only know what's going on with that one character. And then I only see the reactions of everybody else, right? But those are the questions you should be asking yourself. And what do I feel most comfortable or skilled in doing? Once you can answer that, then you can get on to plotting and character development. But for me, I spend a lot of time on that plot line because I'm going to spend a lot of time, a portion of my life developing it. Any questions on the real questions? That sounds a little redundant. All right. Read. I can't tell you how many writers that I've met that are like, I'm not a big reader. I think, oh my God, that's your toolbox, right? That's like saying, well, I'm a carpenter, but I don't have a hammer. I borrow a hammer. And, I'm thinking about getting a screwdriver, right? So for me, I'm a voracious reader, but I actually read. Years ago, it used to be, I'd be all over the place. I love everything from Stephen King to Jodi Picoult. Like I love a lot of the older stuff, right? So for me, literary perfection would be, Harper Lee, right? To Kill a Mockingbird. There's certain books that I'll, reread at least once every couple of years. And it's because it reminds me of how people get into, how a master will do segues and transitions, character development. And I'm reading from a very different angle now. And I'm still a student of the game, right? So I'm a voracious reader, but only for a certain portion of the year. Because when I sit down, and I'll give you a prime example, this is going back maybe 5, 6 years. My wife and I have beach bums, right? So during the summer, we'll be down the beach. I have a stack of books that I want to read. I'm reading the book, I'm into the book. And the more time that elapses for me, the slower I read, because I love the way writers put their stuff together, right? We're all puzzle makers, right? So we're putting these puzzles together. I come home, I'm pounding away on the keys, and I go back and I'm reading it, first paragraph, second paragraph. I look at it again, something seems a little weird. And this is not verbatim by any stretch, but it's also really not my tone, right? And then I realized, wait a minute, like I'm actually being influenced by a book that I'm reading right now. Mm-hmm. And I made a decision years ago that I am going to get all my reading in. There's no two ways about it, because I need to, continue to hone my skills and sharpen it, right? But when I'm writing, when I'm truly, at the laptop and I'm putting the months in, I'm not reading something within my genre, right? When I'm not writing and I'm working on a specific book, then I am in the deep end of the pool within my genre. There are people that consider, their competition to be their enemies. For me, they're allies, right? A rising tide carries all ships. If you're going to read a book about the first Gulf War, you're probably going to read 7 or 8 books before you exhaust your interest of it. So I need to know what other writers who are writing about the Gulf War are actually doing. How are they marketing? Who their agent is? Who their publisher is? It's right there. People all the time, well, how do you know, Steve? Because I go into a bookstore or a library and I look at the spine and I flip it open. Everybody thanks their agent. If you're looking for an agent, go find 12 books of people that represent similar works, and there's your list of agents. Go pitch them, right? And all that research is there. So for me, it's all about continue to put tools in that toolbox, right? And what happens is when you're reading, even as I'll say, even for a seasoned writer, there are times when I think, well, I'm really strong at something, right? So when I first got started, my success is all based in character development. Before I put pen to paper, I know exactly who these characters are, right? I mean, I've written books where the character almost stops speaking and he leans in and raises an eyebrow and everybody's like, oh, he's not too happy, right? The old man's not too pleased with us. That was developed in my head, right? Long before. So I already know, if you say something to Grandpa John, he's going to react a certain way. I know that. I know how Grandpa John smells. I know what his skin feels like, right? He has a hoarse voice. He's been smoking for 35 years. His wife finally, talked. So I developed these characters to that point. What I don't realize at the time is that I could use a little more help on dialogue. And the reason I learned that is because I started reading some masters of dialogue in works that were comparable to mine. So yeah, okay, so I got the plot down, I got the right, you know what I mean? Like, this is what the structure should be in the story itself, right? Character development, I got down. Scene setting, I know some writers that can put you right in the scene. You can smell the flowers in the field, right? I need to become one of those writers. Dialogue, I spent some time in the mall when the malls were still open, right, with my kids, and I'd be in the food court listening to people talk and then realizing nobody ever finishes a sentence. Most people are up in their head, right? My kids asking me if they can have another hamburger, and I'm thinking, did we lock the door before we left the house? I'm not sure we locked the door. Yeah, you can have another hamburger, right? So why wouldn't I write that way? And then all of a sudden I fall in love with internal dialogue, and then I learn as a writer that, oh my God, now I can actually create this intimate bond between the reader and the character just by putting you into the character's thoughts. And all I have to really do is italicize it, right? There's different methods of doing it, and then in most cases, the action is the dialogue. So you need to become really good at that. So how I learned how to do this stuff is I read. I didn't steal anything. I read and read and read and read and read. And then, okay, this is, I could actually, and I won't do it, but I could point out authors who had strong influences in different components of my writing, right? But if I point them out, I'm also insulting other writers, right? So I won't do that. But for me, it's like, well, what do I love, right? I love people that can bring me to a place where I completely forget that, we owe money on the gas bill and the electric bill, right? I actually get into the shoes of somebody who's going through a really difficult time, and now I can relate. So maybe I'm not the only person in this boat rowing. So I feel good about that. You know what I mean? So it's all that stuff. But for me, it all starts with the reading. Storyboarding. Half the writers I talk to love storyboarding. The other half detest it. There is no gray area here. I was in the latter part of that group for a very long time until I met a gentleman by the name of Lou Aronica, who says to me, you are everything but the kitchen sink. So you just bring it all, right? And then we figure it out during editing. How about we start to learn how to storyboard, which is essential. And when we talk about storyboarding, people automatically go to the 8th grade class of outlining, right? Where all they teach you are restrictions. All I'm saying is, this is what the book's about. So if, both Kathy's, Tina, and myself go out for lunch and you say, Steve, what are you working on, right? This is what I'm working on. This is the 2 or 3 sentence elevator pitch. That's my story. That's my plot, my storyline, right? These are the main characters. We're not going to talk about dialogue. I could tell you that it's set in New England, and why wouldn't I? Because I live in New England. Why would I do the research on, Montana, which I've done, and it's insane. But I base all my novels within New England because I don't have to do the research on it, right? And then finally you get to, what's the book about? So this is the storyboard, the early storyboard. So it starts with this. We kind of move our way along. So I actually draw 2 lines, and I say within those 2 lines, I can go back and forth, and the story can take on a life of its own because it's going to, right? But I need to keep moving forward. I can't take a right and then go down this lane. And I'll give you an example. I'm writing a book called The Rocking Chair. The protagonist in the book, his name is Grandpa John, one of my favorite characters that I've ever written. And why wouldn't he be? Because he was my grandfather, right? Grandpa John raises pigeons. And if you know anything about pigeons, they're monogamous birds. They always fly home to the coop they were born in. They're just awesome, awesome animals. He starts selling pigeons to one of the neighbor's kids. And the neighbor lives 20 miles away, right? The pigeon, when he sets the pigeon free or sets it loose, it flies back to its home coop. So the old man's laughing, and he's keeping, the quarters of this kid to hand back to his father. So they have this laugh. I'm actually telling the story about the grandfather, and then I'm like, wait a minute, like I'm talking about the neighbor, right? Who he thinks is stealing from his kid, and he's not. He's just going to give the money back. He's going to teach the kid a lesson. But I fall in love with the neighbor, and I start writing about the neighbor. And then I go back to the storyboard and say, wait a minute, I'm actually on a secondary road. I need to get back on the highway, right? Now, all a storyboard does is it builds efficiencies. It allows you to streamline the process. It's not supposed to inhibit it at all, right? Like I'll tell you, I'm actually more creative if I know where we're heading. Case in point, Alabama trip, just got home from it. So when Jerry and I sit down and talk about it, I could sit home and stress at this desk and be like, oh my God, what am I writing next? Versus we've already agreed on chapters 1 through 9. So I know what the scene, what the scene's going to be. I know what the setting's going to be. I know the climate, this and that, and I can start just throwing those chunks of clay in there and then start to develop the story in that sense, right? Storyboarding for me, it's all about the outlining process. And if I were to teach anybody or convince any writer of anything that they need to be doing, I would say it's storyboarding. And it's a tough sell for some people. There are people that come back to me and say, listen, it kind of, it puts a cloud over my creativity, right? Because I like to just wing it. It's the Wild West. I get out there and I start writing. I don't know where the character's going to go. I said, I get it. I truly do. And there's no reason you can't continue to do that. But how do you shoot at a target when you can't see the target? Well, you have no idea where the target is. That drives me nuts. I mean, I'll tell you, if you're a type A personality, this is a difficult deal, right? You guys know that. If you need to get a book done within 3 weeks, good luck. Find another craft. So we just chip away, right? But I need to know what I'm aiming for. We can move the target later, but I need to be working towards something. And without a storyboard, I can't do it. So for me, that's a huge piece, at least within the process now. And we'll go old school on it, right? I'm talking flip chart, whiteboard, take pictures of it, transcribe it, put it into a Microsoft Word document, go over it again. Once the storyboard's done, it's done. It's now time to write. And at least now I have a roadmap, right? We didn't just get in the car, fill the tank up, and well, we're heading north. I have no idea where we're going, but we're heading north. And that can be fun too. But if you really want to pump out a book within a time where, within 10 years, you might want to get on a little bit of an outline, at least throw some structure into the discipline. Right. This makes me laugh. People all the time, and I'm sure it's happened to everybody here, where you've been called lucky for something. So my older brother worked for NASCAR for years, right? He was on Greg Bevel's team. He was in the pick row, just awesome, right? And if I said to my brother, good luck on Sunday at the race, he would start laughing. There was no such thing as luck. Luck is where preparation meets opportunity. God be with us if we're not prepared, right? Things may happen, but our job is to be prepared. Our job is to do the work. So when I tell people all the time, and there's this theory in all different entertainment and creative disciplines, they call it 10,000 hours, right? Really all they're saying is it's seat time. You need to sit in your seat and you need to write. And you need to write. And you need to write. And if I've had people come to me and say, hey, I'm working on a book right now. How long have you been working on it? Well, this long. But I stepped away from it. For how long? For 4 months. You should probably come up with a different idea that you're more passionate about. After 30 years, I am still somebody who gets excited about working, right? I used to think it was the published books, right, with my name on the cover. Those are the trophies. The real trophy in the end, now that I've lived long enough to connect some of the dots, right, to my past, has been the work. The joy's been in the work. Nobody has any idea. Maybe you folks on this call, right, and other writers have an idea of what goes into it, right, and what you've put into your own work. So for me, most people who read my work, or my family or friends, they have no idea what I put in. And the things that I take pride in would make no sense to them. Me overcoming obstacles, or setting these invisible deadlines that I need to make in order for me to get this book out, or whatever, right? So for me, I tell people all the time, I don't care if you have to write snippets. I'll be in a class, and all of a sudden my mind starts drifting off, and then I go home and I write a story about a snowstorm, right? Because I'm watching all this snow come, fall down, and people are getting sleepy and this and that, and I create the scene. And my wife will say, well, what are you gonna do with that? That's a puzzle piece that's going into the puzzle, right? I don't write linear. We don't write from A to Z. I mean, the storyboard should tell us what the roadmap is, but at some point I'm gonna put this really cool snow scene, which is almost poetic because I had time to devote to what the scene looked like, into my book, right? For me, not A to Z. I am a puzzle maker. I create these puzzles. I try to put things in sequence, but it doesn't always happen that way. And I'll tell you, there are times where I'll move chapters around at the end during the editing process because it makes better sense. The beginning always has to be the beginning. And that hook better be sharp, right, to keep people interested. The ending is what people are going to talk about. Everything in the middle, do the best you can, right? But that beginning and end, and I tell people all the time, if you spend an hour on a page, which I don't know how you could pull that off, but you better spend 20 hours on the first page and 20 hours on the last page, right? The difference between, a professional writer is nothing more than an amateur that never quit. And that's the truth, right? I have friends I went to, I've met people along the way, or they went to Yale, or they went to Princeton. And I learned how. I'm not saying the value of that education isn't priceless. It is. But unless you decided to take a seat at the same table as Kathy and I, right, and just start hammering away year in and year out, then that's when you start to build, right? And there are times that I'll be talking to people when I'm thinking, you're going to make a career out of this, versus somebody who just wants to do one book. For me, there's no difference. It's all about seat time, right? So it's a passion for me, but it's also a discipline. I do not write again on Christmas. I do not write on Sundays, right? But there are times where I'll write something on a cocktail napkin and make sure that I have it in my pocket because I don't want to miss that idea. It's never going to come to me again. These iPhones are absolutely terrible. They're tracking devices, right? You can't go anywhere and get, a breath of fresh air without somebody tracking you down. However, I can also talk into it and have notes where I can, again, transcribe them later, right, into my writing. So as much as it's a passion, it's a discipline. And, it's a little bit cliched at the bottom there, show, don't tell. I still tell myself that all the time, always. I'll put up a little sign over my desk. I can say that Kathy was angry, but that's lazy of me to say that. Or I can show that, Kathy's fists were clenched, right? Her face turned crimson red, right? Her tone went up an octave. And then, oh yeah, you don't have to tell the reader that, Kathy's angry. Familiar material. What I'm talking about there is, again, scene setting. I wrote a book, again, The Rocking Chair. I based it on the foothills of the Rocky Mountains in Montana. This is how young and naive I was. I've never been to Montana. So I had to research everything from the cattle to the, all the wildlife, the vegetation, what the climate was like, what their dialect was like, what they ate, what they didn't eat, what they loved and didn't love. I did more research on Montana. If I had put it in New England, at the foothills of the Blue Mountains, right, which is west of Boston, I've hiked through there. I don't have to do any research. Save yourself some time, write about the stuff that you know, right? And less is more. I believe this wholeheartedly. When I call somebody a master writer, what I'm talking about, at least my own definition, is they've taken a very complex storyline. They've taken characters and they've weave them in and out of each other where there's an impact, a constant impact to each other, right? And they made it sound like you were sitting on a front porch listening to one of your own grandparents tell the story. And that's the reason I love To Kill a Mockingbird. If you really think about that book, the way she developed that book, I mean, there's some topics in there that are, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But she tells it like you're sipping lemonade, right? And you're just watching the high grass sway back and forth. And I love that. And I continue to aspire to that. Never, ever going to believe in perfection, because if there's an end game here, then, I'm in the wrong game myself, right? It continues to be challenging, and it should be. I'm still, surprised. I've written 17 books. I'm still surprised when I could finish one, right? And that just tells me that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, right? Me writing a book on St. Peter. Who am I to write a book on St. Peter, right? Absolutely terrifying. But you can bet I'm gonna do my research and do the best job I can with it, right? So that's the gift, right? When I talk to my kids, we'll talk about money. You need money to live, right? But I said, imagine if you could look back on your entire life and think about the things that you did or experienced that made your life worth living. And for me, that's what writing is, right? If we hit a windfall for X amount of money, yeah, we're going to go travel and we're going to enjoy it. And the kids, right? Nobody's going to rip that check up. However, it's still rewarding to me beyond that. Young writers or newer writers, I want to write a book, and I said, well, you could also get your paper route back, right? Like start there, and they'll start laughing. And I said, listen, this is not an easy path. Again, I'm never going to discourage anybody, never, but be realistic, right? You need to, plant your feet and say, even if I'm the only one who's going to read this book, then I need to write it. I need to write it. I need to get it out, right? So being a writer is what I used to do. It's not who I am. It's, I am a writer. And it's not because I went to a certain school. It's because I fell in love with the craft and I continue to practice at it. Never going to perfect it. And I think that's also a blessing. But it's all about having the seed time. So if you're working on something, I don't care if it's an hour a day. And when I talk about writing, I'm not talking, quill pen with a candle, or I'm not talking about pounding on a laptop. I'm talking about putting some time and effort in. Whether you go for a ride and look at a scene that you say, I want in my book, I'm going to write this up right here because I can visualize it. So I want to put my reader there. Or listening to a conversation. It's chipping away. Whether you're doing the research or you're talking into your phone or you're actually pounding away on the keys, make some progress. Because the more progress you make, the easier it is to tell people that you're writing a book, right? Because you're going to finish it. And I know a lot of people who won't say that until they're about 60,000 words in, right? But that's another deal. Editing. I usually go through it 2 or 3 times. So I'll write a book, I'll not rewrite it, I'll edit it, and then I'll edit it again. It goes in the bottom drawer of my desk, and it stays there for a couple months. When I pull it back out and I read it, this, in my honest opinion, is the last time that I can ever find holes in the story. Characters, there's a like a secondary character that's on page 8, disappears until page 180. That's not good, right? So what happened? Where's the hole? How do I fill that gap and this and that, right? What I thought I was writing, now I can read that as close to a reader as possible. The problem with writing a book is you know what the book is, and you've actually written it in your head before you put it on paper. So when I first started, I would sit with an attorney by trade. He's a very good friend of mine. And at first I used to think he was the devil's advocate. And then I came to learn he's actually the devil, right? But he would sit there and tell me, Steve, it's not there. I'm like, Russ, it's there. I'm telling you it's there. I wrote it. Read it out loud. And I would read it out loud and it's not there. It's in my head, but it's not there. One of the tricks to becoming a successful writer, and again, 1 book, 100 books, it does not matter, is finding the right support system, right? And understanding that you need the right support system. I've known people along the way who don't need any help because obviously it's the hand of God, right, that created this work. And we all want to believe that. It's your baby, right? I mean, you're taking the baby out of the bathwater, you're going to hand it to somebody else. My God. In the beginning, very difficult for me because I didn't know these people, who they should be. By vetting some of this out, and whoever's watching this recording can reach out to me and I can send you to some people that are absolutely phenomenal, right? But being a copy editor or a talented copy editor is a very different craft or discipline than being a writer.
That's right.
Right? And I can look at other people's stuff and proof it, But a copy editor for me is not just, well, we're going to pick up on all the typos and grammatical errors, and I'm going to be a fourth grade teacher. On top of that, we're going to talk about your story, so your plotting. We're going to talk about your character development, your scene setting, your dialogue. I'm going to break it down and tell you what's missing, what you did right, and maybe what you didn't do right, and how you can make that better. So here's the difficulty with finding the right editor. I've met editors along the way who are frustrated writers, right? And that's okay as long as they can remain objective toward your work. Today, if I'm being honest, and of course I'm going to be honest, the editors that I work with are editors. So when I give them my work, they are familiar with my work. They know who my audience is. They don't love horror, and they, and dislike tearjerkers, or I wouldn't be working with them. I mean, I had a friend who went to an editor, came back, and he shows me the manuscript, and this woman bled red all over it. So I said, well, what do you think she didn't like about it? He said, well, this, that, and he's going through this litany, right? And I said, I don't think she likes the genre in which you write. Why don't you confirm that? And he contacts her and says, listen, I'm right. It's a horror novel. She said, oh, I can't stand horror. There you go, Mike, right? Lesson to be learned. And he had to pay her or whatever, but this is the only place in the entire process where I will pay is for a copy editor. I'm fortunate in that, I work with a couple different entities now. One of my publishers, who's my major publisher, we have a built-in in-house copy editor who's phenomenal. Best I've ever worked with, right? And he'll take care of business for me, right? But if I'm putting out a book myself, or I'm working with an indie publisher, and I do all of that, right? I make sure that I find an editor who is going to keep me honest. Last thing I want to do is see this book come out and then find 6 different typos. I have readers send it to me and say, hey, Steve, because for me, the difference between traditional publishing and indie publishing, in many respects, it used to be 60,000 books were published a year, right? That's actually increased. Amazon, as you all know, have absolutely changed the game. In some cases for the better, right? Because they've created a more level playing field. All I say to indie writers is there's no difference from you writing what you write versus somebody out of New York City who's writing for one of the 5 conglomerates. The difference is this: if a book comes out from a traditional publisher, it is clean, pristine. If it comes out from an indie house, I can tell you whether or not they hired an indie book designer for formatting on the interior. I can tell you whether or not they had a professional book cover designer. I can tell you whether or not they had a copy editor. And I hire all 3, and I pay out of pocket for all 3 if I need to, because when my book comes out, regardless if it's from an indie publisher, self-published, or a traditional publisher, it needs to look like it's coming out of New York. That's the quality that you need to release a book at, right? So for me, the editor is a big, big part of that, right? Finding strengths in your right. If you work with the right editor, they will actually start to hone your skills. I've had editors say to me, hey, listen, I love your writing style. I wish you'd used a little bit more dialogue, right? And I've had other editors where, I'll read the email and I'll toggle off. Nope, I'm not doing it. Nope. And I mean, I'm angry. And I'll go for a walk. I'll come back. I'll toggle back on. I'll lick it. I'll read it again. Nope, I'm not doing it. Toggle back off. 3 days later, I'm like, he's right here. He's right here. He's right here. That I'm not so sure about this. And then you start to accept some of the stuff that you thought you had right, but you have to be willing to, yeah, to be critiqued and taken, as long as it's constructive. And you should be able to know right out of the gate whether or not it's constructive or destructive. You don't want to work with somebody who doesn't understand or appreciate your style of voice, or somebody that can better your work without being egocentric about it, right? This should not be self-serving. I mean, I have an editor who actually travels the country in an RV. She is awesome. And she does not care about her work. And I always acknowledge her, right? But she wants my work to be better. And she's proven it. And it's amazing working with her, because she'll find stuff, and at first it used to be, Steve, I hate to bring this up. And I was like, no, you need to hit me with it, right? What is it? This book needs to be the best it can be, right? And how I find my strengths is through that. Also, how we identify weaknesses, for the most part, is done in the editing process. You may not pick it up while you're reading other people's work, but when you're getting your stuff edited, you're going to know. Soliciting feedback, I'll be real quick because I'm burning through some time here, but it's important. I mean, I set up a beta team before I release a book. And we'll bring in, 12 people. I'll have it catered. I'll print out manuscripts 4 to 6 weeks before they read this. I will never ask somebody what's wrong with my book, because they will find something wrong with it. You've asked them to. Hey, what did you think? And then I'll have, when we all get together, pre-COVID, post-COVID, in a room, everybody's eating and, having a drink and relaxed and having fun. Everybody's read the book. And then I start with very specific questions. All I want to do is fine tune, right? But it's important for me to go after objective book reviewers, to go after people that will critique my work in a way that is somewhat familiar with it. In some cases, they're not familiar with it. So I need some new ideas. But you have to be thick-skinned in the sense that, hey, I'm a student of the game. I'm asking questions because I want to better my work. And then I want to strengthen my work. Used to be, hey, I want to highlight all the stuff that I'm strong in, right? Now it becomes, I want to know the weaknesses so I can get better at that. And I can bring that up to where I'm at. Right. Connect with me on Facebook and Twitter. Good for me. If I was on my game today, we would have more time for Q&A, but whatever time is left, Kathy, if we can just throw it out there.
I will, I want to leave a little bit more time. So if anybody does have a question, we can bring everybody on board. I've had you on Spotlight, so I'm going to take you off of that real quick. And then if you have a question, please raise your hand, because and let's get back on galley view, because I think you have covered everything so wonderfully, and I concur with everything that you said. It's so great. So thank you for sharing everything. And
thank you.
If we can take the PowerPoint off, I think that'll make it easier.
Yeah, I'm going to stop shit. Yeah, here we go.
Okay. All right. Let's see. All right.
Here we go.
There we go, everybody. Okay. Any questions or comments? Yes, Kathy.
Well, I loved the overview, Stephen. I wrote down some quotes that I'm going to look at for a while.
Perfect.
And my question is about the 20 years that you've taught your children, when you use the word failure. That's not my word.
Yeah.
How do you know when you've succeeded? I'm just wondering about what book maybe made you realize, oh, this is it. Because as writers, we're so much in the process. But
right.
on my down days, I think, because it took me years to get a traditional publisher.
Right.
And
it did for me as well. It did.
And is that when you can start feeling a little more comfortable in your skin? Because I have a lot of bottom drawer books.
Right.
Some of them need to be burned.
Right.
Not the whole thing, but portions of them. And so I'm at that point right now where I'm on book number 3, and I'm thinking, okay, which one next?
Yeah, great question. So failure, and I'm talking specifically for myself. So unfortunately, we live in a society that bases or measures success financially, right? I'm never ever going to talk that way. And I have made money doing this, and there have been years where I would have been better off having my paper route back. I made more money when I was 12, right? So either way, I'm going to move forward. For me, success was when people were interested. So one of the biggest questions I ever get, and this will kind of line up with what you're asking, Kathy, but people ask me, should I go the traditional route or the indie route? And the big difference is, traditionally, you have some opportunity there to work with folks who are going to bring you to an audience. At least that's the hope, right? If you're an indie author who has an existing audience or readership, say with a couple thousand people. So I know that I'm going to put out a book, and I know at least 2,000, 3,000, 1,200, whatever it is that makes you feel comfortable, are going to read this book, that are interested in my work. For me, that was the definition of success. That I wasn't the only one who was interested now. I didn't have to cut it, I didn't have to sign a check for 25,000. I had to put out a book that people are going to read. And in the beginning, it was some people, right? So when I talk about failing, what I'm talking about is, I put out a book, that book doesn't fly. Let me get on to the next book. That book doesn't fly. Let me get on to the next book. And my kids are seeing me put all this time and effort into something that would be hard for me to qualify as a success, right? So, and I never talk money with them. It's not their business, right? They can make their own money. But when you get to a certain point, I want to be able to say, listen, you know, I have X amount of reviews on Amazon. I'll show up at a book signing. Some people will show, right? Like, you know, COVID has turned the world upside down. So we're doing a lot of Zoom events, which I love because they're recorded and we can share them with, you know, countless people. But for me, it's about interest, Kathy. Are people interested? And do you know if they're interested in your work? And once you can answer yes to that, in my opinion, you're a success. And again, I shouldn't say you're a success. I'm a success, right? I'm talking about my own metrics.
That's really, really helpful. Really, really helpful. And
Yes.
I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Tina, go ahead.
Hi there. First of all, thank you so much. This is a wonderful talk, and I had several aha moments. One of them was when you were talking about if you've walked away from your manuscript for more than 4 months, maybe you should come up with a different idea.
Right.
And I actually think that I would like to experiment with a different genre. So my question for you is, have you experimented with other genres? And have you, if not, have you ever felt limited to one genre?
Yeah, great question. And I think I have the right answer for you, right? So for me, when I first got started, I was invited to do, it was called At the Stroke of Midnight. So there were 24 short stories and it was a book of horror. And the woman who approached me said, I would really love to share this with you. So I'll do 12 stories, you do 12 stories. So I said, I don't really write horror. Well, it's going to be published with this and that. And this is the potential readership. So I said, well, I write horror. And I did. And the book got published. And then I wrote poetry and I've written short stories and I love all of it. I've written scripts. So, plays, and I've written, scripts for the screen. I will say this, at a certain point, if you want to make quote unquote a name as a writer, right? And I'm talking about the marketing piece of this, of branding, right? That old cliche being the jack of all trades and the master of none. So for somebody who's just getting started, absolutely, and you're crazy if you don't experiment because you want to find that, right? For me, when I put out a book, there better be certain parallels, right? Because my readership expects that they're going to be moved emotionally. And I could set the book in a prison, but it better be character driven, and it better be something that's emotional. So when you get to the tail end, because it's an expectation. So I've spent, 20 years building up these expectations for readers. And then now that I know, call my readership, right? So it would be crazy for me to flip unless I use the pseudonym, which I'm not saying I won't do, right? And get into a different genre. But when you first get started, you should absolutely try out different genres.
Yeah, it's very good advice. I always think of Anne Rice, who was known for creating this, this vampire, and
Right.
she switched gears and then wrote Christ the Child, she totally switched gears, and her fan base didn't follow that, and then she went back, and then it was starting, and then we lost her. I don't think there's anything wrong with experimenting.
Me either.
I do think that people do have expectations, and if you've got the base, like you got with the menu, man, people are wanting that. So Kathy, you're on the right track. You've got that genre, stick with it. And, I always wanted to write a novel, and I've been working on one forever. It's going to be my swan song, but I'm known for writing about how books save me. So that's what people know me for. So that's what I'm focusing on. But all these things that you have given us, this toolbox, is absolutely everything that I believe in too. But every time I come to these writers clubs with our authors, and I think I know, I learn so much. And that's why this is recorded and will go up on my Kathy L. Murphy channel. Steve, if you want it if you have your own channel, or I can send you the video too.
If you could, I'd love to share it with my
I will send it to you. I download it as soon as we're done, and then I put it up, and then I'll share it with you. But the whole point for me of success is that you think about how happy things make you feel. You know, COVID has been horrible, but in another way, it has given me the time to really focus on my writing and really focus on my art and focus on my family. So it's like a reset button. And when I think, and it's also given me a chance to think about when I've been happiest in my life. And you know, it's when I've been my poorest, which is right now, because I'm not able to work at all. The times that I went back to college and I was dead broke, working my way through school, doing hair, was when I made the best friends of my life. And I think if you just ask that question of yourself, what makes you happy?
Right.
You'll figure it out. Because if it's not money, and no matter what anybody says, I know a lot of people that are very wealthy that are the most unhappy people I've ever seen in my life. Though I know a lot of rich people that are happy too. It's really about what makes you bound out of bed every morning and you just can't wait to start writing that next book on Peter. I can't wait to read that book.
I'll get your copy.
I think about The Red Tent by Anita Diamant, about this very small character she wrote in the Bible called Dinah. How she did that is, I think it's a God thing. I think that's going to be very interesting. I can't wait to read it. And I've got this in the sack to read. So
awesome.
Everybody had just released Lawn Darts and Lemonade. And tell us where we can see that, what's the process on the film? When can we?
Yeah, so it's in IMDb. So if you go to IMDb, the Thursday Night Club, it's there. The filming is happening right now in Connecticut, which has been so exciting. So one of the featured actors in it is Gloria Gaynor, if you remember her.
Yes.
I Will Survive. So she ended up going on and she had an amazing career in gospel.
Yep.
So the book, because I write, it's so funny. I don't per se write Christian works, but I write very wholesome type books, right? Nothing that even when my kids were younger, wouldn't be embarrassed for me to share with them, right? So there's no, if you need violence in a story to tell that story, then you need violence, but we don't need it if we don't need it, right? Sex, cursing, all that stuff. So this is a really wholesome book. It's about 5 friends, and I'll be real quick with this, but you have 5 college friends. One of them, there's a tragic accident and one of them passes, right? So to honor this person, they end up having a bet. And because they're in college and they're poor, right, they each put up 25 cents and they throw it into a peanut jar. And whoever can commit the greatest deed, the greatest act of kindness by Christmas Eve wins the pot. But there are rules. It has to be anonymous. You can't spend money, this and that. And these 4 people go out into the world, young people. And what they do is absolutely tremendous. And it's so funny when people say, oh, I would love to help, but I need to get to a certain place, or I need to make X amount of money. And it makes me laugh, and I won't laugh at them, but I'll just laugh to myself, like, you can actually leave your house right now and bump into somebody that needs help, right? So it's all based around that. But Christmas is the setting, but I think it's more of a year-round type of deal. When I wrote it, and then my co-writer on Lou Aronica on the script, we were actually asked to rewrite it during Easter, to put it into an Easter theme. And then they came back and said, because, the market's so saturated with Hallmark Christmas movies. And then they came back and said, well, there's a reason that they're saturated.
That's right. That's right.
So that's the deal. So we don't see this as a blockbuster that's going to be released in the theaters, but definitely streaming, like on Netflix or on Hallmark type movies. So I couldn't be any more excited. My daughter and I are actually driving to Connecticut on Monday, and the guy's like, oh, do you want to be? I said, I am, and I wrote it, right? So I want to stand off to the side and experience this through her.
Yeah. And
share that with her. And that'll mean more to me than the check. You know what I mean? Really. And that's what makes me happy.
That's an awesome story, and I can't wait to see it. I want to tell you too about, I have an author friend that was in this crazy thing. It was on our phone. It was called The Chosen, and it's now, anyway, Advait Guge played Joshua. Awesome. And he's a friend of mine who lives in Dallas, and that is very well done, you
Yeah.
know, and it might be a great thing to watch, just kind of, you know, but
Yeah.
that guy who's doing it, they're doing another season.
Yeah, Dallas Jenkins.
And
Yep.
it was the weirdest thing. For $14.95, you could download and watch a session or a season or something. But what it would do is you get to watch it free, and you could give the $14.95 to somebody else.
Right.
And it created this humongous buzz. It's the most remarkable film thing I've ever seen in my life. And now it's out there where you can watch it everywhere. But
yeah, it was, I got to tell you, I'm so happy you brought that up. So it was part of my research, and it's amazing what they did. And Dallas Jenkins, who's the producer on it. They actually created Judea in Texas. So if you like, if you look at the set, it's Capernaum and Bethsaida. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's beautiful, right? The way he did it. But what I love about this is it's real, it's relatable, it's accessible. And, you know, when you think back to 2000 years ago and somebody speaking in parables, it's hard for some people to get that to become, you know, relatable. Dallas Jenkins actually brought them to life and made them human and real.
it's
and
amazing.
relatable. I mean, it's a blessing. It's unbelievable.
And what's wild is Advait, you know, he has this accent where he had a vocal coach to help him speak like the way they spoke in that time.
Right.
I couldn't believe it. And he just did a State Farm commercial, and he plays like a fashion designer. It's just, but episode 7, his name is Advait Dugay, and he's a friend of mine, and he is an amazing actor, songwriter, author. He's working on books. So cool. That is so cool.
That's awesome. I'm gonna look him up.
We want a full report on your Connecticut trip. So
I will. I'll send pictures and I'll send it over to you. Yeah.
And we'll get this up. We'll get this up, and I'll get you a copy. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Kathy, for joining us.
Yeah,
And
thank
for
you.
everybody who didn't get here today, you know, it's going to be up on my Kathy L. Murphy. Please subscribe. It's really important that I get everybody on that page. It helps me so much in getting further views. So please subscribe. It's free. So thank you, Stephen. Thank you. I look forward to everything you're doing, and I cannot tell you what an honor and privilege it was to have you here this Saturday morning.
It was my honor and privilege, and I'm grateful to you for many, many things that go beyond today. So thank you for being you, and I mean that.
Well, have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next time. I've got my book and film club tonight, too, at 6:30. We're watching Bringing Up Baby with Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, and we'll be discussing it. So please come. You never know what I'll wear.
I love it.
Always dress up for our book and film club. So it's at 6:30. And if you can't find the link on my page, then message me. Thank you, Stephen. Have a wonderful day. Keep writing. It's all about the story. Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.